What is going on, guys? This is Sin. So for the past couple of months, I've kept hearing a bunch of critiques about Phantasme, and rightfully so, because there's a bunch of positive and negative aspects about the card. But with Phantom Nightmare right around the corner, I really wanted to make a full video on it and kind of let you guys know how I feel about the card and also why, because a lot of things are about to change very soon. But before we go any further, I would really appreciate you if you could smash the like and subscribe button for me real quick. Thank you guys so much. You're the best. And now let's get right into it. Alright, so first things first, I'll talk about the positive aspects about the card. So first of all, it is a strict +1 if you can resolve it, because you're going to be special summoning it, so you get one extra body on the field, but the amount of cards in your hand, they stay the same, because you're gonna go from 5 cards to 4 cards when you summon this, and then you're gonna draw 2 cards and then put back 1, or draw 3, put back 2, draw 4, put back 3, depending on the amount of link monsters on your opponent's field. So it's technically always something that is in your advantage, and also you're mulliganing bad cards potentially to your deck, so you can actually improve the consistency of your deck quite drastically with Phantasme. Not to mention that you can also summon it on your turn, and this is actually very interesting that it triggers if your opponent special summons a link monster, not necessarily if your opponent link summons. So yeah, your opponent could literally activate like a Monster Reborn S card on a link monster, and then you can trigger Phantasme once on your turn, once on your opponent's turn. So that used to be very relevant against Tri Brigade, because if they would summon their link monster off of their Tri Brigade monsters, you could special summon the Phantasme, and then once they would go Revolt to summon the Charade, then you could Phantasme again. So drawing multiple Phantasmes was actually a good thing, and sometimes even if you would Phantasme into Phantasme, you would still keep the second Phantasme in your hand. So yeah, depending on what strategy your opponent's deck is, Phantasme could be a very good card to draw in multiples. And it's usually not going to be a really like a bad dead draw in your deck, in your hand rather, for a very specific reason, because it's not really worth main decking. As a matter of fact, it's just more of a side deck card. There are so many decks that don't really need to link summon, like runic based strategies or Labyrinth or some other decks that just don't care. You're not really trying to play Phantasme for these decks, but rather for the decks that will always link summon, and preferably are very linear as well. So which decks are linear in the way they function and will always link summon basically regardless of what they're trying to do? Well, the first one is Dragon Link. Obviously, there was the word link in the deck, so it's always going to be link summoning. If they normal summon a dragon monster, you know that their next action is typically going to be Strike or Dragon. So against them, it's pretty nice. And also in the Dragon Link deck, Phantasme is also pretty nice because it is a Dark Dragon monster, and it's searchable by Seyfert if you happen to pitch the Absol Dragon. So that's actually pretty cool, because the Absol will also be fetching the Rocket Chaser. Phantasme being a dragon also means that you can turn it into a Romulus when you're going second, or a Hieratic Seal, whatever you want to. So yeah, this card is very good in and against Dragon Link, but it's also very good in and against Rescue Ace, because that deck is also always going to be link summoning, unless they randomly go for a Turbulence right off the bat, and then they're just passing turn on like 4 back row and nothing else, which usually they're not going to be doing. They're always going to be playing their deck as kind of like a combo deck. In the Rescue Ace deck itself, it's nice because you play a lot of bricks, honestly, and you can mulligan back your bricks, like the Contain, Extinguish, all the garbage Rescue Ace spells and traps that you don't really need. And against the deck, it's also very nice because, again, not only are you improving your deck's consistency, but Phantasme does have another ability that can negate and destroy the activation of any card or effect that targets a monster you control. So against Dragon Link, maybe it's less relevant because they're going to be bringing out Hieratic Seal, but I mean, you still have a body that you can jump over or threaten the Hieratic Seal by going battle phase. And against Rescue Ace, I mean, all their cards would target your monsters, obviously. The Contain is a Veiler, and then the Extinguish is a pop. So if you can negate these cards, and also the Preventer, that's a Book of Moon, all the better for you, because you went +1 and then you generated a body that can negate stuff. So it's kind of like a Seravis in a way, and it's also good against like Infinite Impermanence and generic negation cards. So yeah, it's just an extra push going second that also boosts your consistency. But by the time you draw it, sometimes it's not good enough. So that's, I'm going to be going into details a little later on. Now, I wanted to say another thing about Phantasme. It is very reminiscent to another engine that technically already exists at the moment, but people are not choosing to play it in a bunch of decks, and that would be the Rescue Ace Impulse and Fire Attacker engine. This is particularly good in Labyrinth and decks that just trigger a bunch of graveyard effects, Maybe not when they were sent by a card effect, because, or actually, yeah, maybe, because the fire attacker doesn't discard as a cost. You draw 2 and then discard as part of the effect. Whether you want to like mulligan back into your deck after drawing or discard the cards off of the fire attacker, but in the Labyrinth deck it's better to discard because you can get cards like Rumpelteufel in the graveyard, and that has a pretty nasty graveyard effect. So yeah, just keep that in mind if you're playing a deck like Labyrinth, for example. Maybe the card to play is not Phantasme, but rather the Rescue Ace package, so it would consist of 3 Impulse as well as 1 fire attacker. Very similar concept, again, because you're drawing 2 and then you're discarding 1. And you're also summoning a monster on the field, but unlike Phantasme, it's not going to be protecting you from anything. And also it does involve a brick in a way. I think this has to summon from the deck very specifically. Yes, it does. So yeah, if you draw like both of them, then you have 2 dead cards in your hand. That's kind of unfortunate. Now, where this card stops being very nice would be against decks like Fire King. There is a pretty good reason why. First of all, if you are playing a bunch of hand traps in your deck with Phantasme, kind of doesn't really work well against like your opponent immediately going normal summon Snake Eye Ash effect, because by the time you can Phantasme your opponent after the first Link summon, already too much has passed and the Phantasme is going to be way too late. So if you draw like an Ash or a Droll or an Imperm after that, it's going to be completely dead. And as a matter of fact, drawing an Imperm off of Phantasme is completely useless. You have to put it back in your deck because you now have a monster on the field that blocks you. So that's not really ideal, right? But Phantasme also interacts poorly with some hand traps that you might be playing already. So again, if you draw Droll off of Phantasme, it's pretty garbage because it would be so late, again, because a bunch of decks, they just search a lot before they Link summon. Snake Eye Fire King is one of those decks, actually. Their first Link summon doesn't have to be Link Kuriboh. They can go normal summon Ash and then search the Populace and then search the original Sinful Spell Snake Eye, and then immediately send the Populace instead of going into Link Kuriboh, summon the Ponyx and then search and then get the Populace and then go into the Flamberge and then get the Garunix off of the pop of the Ponyx and then link off into the Masquerena. Obviously, if you Phantasme there, it's just not going to be doing anything at all, which is what I am not a really big fan of. And even if you manage to Phantasme early, they can still destroy the Kirin off of the Garunix instead of the Barong, and then they can destroy the Phantasme, and it doesn't target, so you're not going to be able to protect your Phantasme by discarding a card, and then they can still keep playing in full combos. So if, again, the hand traps are going to be way too late if you get them there. Not to mention that if your opponent has a Fire King hand, it's going to be completely dead, so your opponent can also go normal summon Fire King Arvata, and then go like Sanctuary into Island, destroy something, get the Garunix off, never link summon a single time, and then you got a complete dead Phantasme in your hand. You basically hand loop yourself for 1. Phantasme forces you to rely on your opponent summoning Link monsters, but the Rescue Ace cards, you just don't care. It's whenever your opponent activates a monster effect. So that is the beauty about the Rescue Ace cards. They're just more generic. You can pretty much always side deck them in against any deck, whereas Phantasme, very limited in its option, pretty much only really good against Rescue Ace and Dragon Link, which are actually losing in popularity in contrast to like decks like Fire King and Labyrinth, for example. 2 decks that, like I said, don't really lose to Phantasme. And again, another very bad thing, and I've talked about this a lot in the past, is that it turns on Triple Tactic Talents and Thrust for absolutely free, and in a very, very bad way, because now the Thrust actually has its nasty ability to be able to search a spell card and use it right away, and you don't really want that, like, at all. It really nullifies the advantage that you're even generating with the card in the first place, because Thrust is infinitely less scarier when all it can really do in a game 1 would be, or maybe not in a game 1, but if Thrust is like setting like an Imperm, then it's irrelevant. I guess if it's setting like a D-Bearer, then that's really scary, obviously. But if Thrust can search like a 1-of that's really nasty, like an instant fusion into like a crack card, yeah, that's gonna be relevant in Infernoids in the future. Yeah, that's gonna be really bad for you. And Triple Tactic Talents as well, look at your hand and make you now kind of unbrick in a way, make your hand worse. Yeah, it's not really what you want. Now, again, I've said that Phantasme was bad with hand traps, and I'm going to explain why. If you have Droll and Phantasme, you have the choice between either Drolling first and then Phantasming later, and basically not doing anything, or Phantasming first, which again would be a little too late, and then Drolling later. I'm not a really big fan of that, because obviously if you have to Droll first, then your Phantasme can't draw anything, and it's just a dead card. Literally does nothing. You might as well hold it for next turn. Completely defeats the purpose of even playing the card in the first place. And again, with Imperm, it's also very awkward, because you always have to Imperm first and then Phantasme. I guess if your opponent summons a Link monster, since Phantasme is a trigger effect, at least in the TCG. In the OCG, it functions kind of like more similarly to a quick effect. You would have to go like Chainlink 1 Phantasme and then Chainlink 2 Imperm. if your opponent, again, is summoning a Link monster that you want to negate. But it does make, it does synergize a little with each other, in a way, kind of. And with Ashe, whatever, I mean, again, if you're drawing Ashe off of Phantasme against Fire King, it's gonna be super late, because everything that was Ashable, your opponent already went through everything. So yeah, it's better off if you're playing Board Breakers instead. Board Breakers are just not good enough in the upcoming format, and I will be making a full video just on that. And another noteworthy thing about Phantasme and Ashe is the fact that Phantasme is Ashable, and if you're playing against this pure Snake Eye or even Fire King strategy, your opponent can simply recycle back the Ashe off of the that he negated the Phantasme with very easily with the Sunlight Wolf, and you basically just kind of went neg1 for free. Again, you want all of your cards to be alive if possible. So yeah, that's very unfortunate. But Phantasme still has the potential of being pretty good, and if you don't want to play Phantasme, you can still play the Rescue Ace engine, which is super similar. Just remember that it's three good cards to 1 bad card for the ratio. So if you draw the Fire Attacker, then you're in a bad spot, but it's not the end of the world. You're just not gonna draw it. You're good at the game. Anyways, that's all I had for this video. So guys, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys very soon. Peace.